I listen to everybody, but ultimately, my attitude is the one that matters, isn't it? That's the way it works. That's the way the system is. You look at the rules of the Senate, even the rules of the House, but the rules of the Senate and some of the things you have to go through, it's really a bad thing for the country, in my opinion.
Nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it.
According to our next two guests, one way that democracies die off is that they are led by dangerous authoritarian rulers, surrounded by sycophants, and unrestrained by the legislative bodies that are supposed to rein them in. Is that what's happening to us? Well, let's ask them. Joining me now are Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, professors of government at Harvard University and authors of How Democracies Die. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. What a timely book. I don't know how you prognosticated that this book would be exactly what people wanted and needed in the moment. I'm going to start with you, Stephen. In your book, you talk about the fact that institutions alone can't really protect democracy, that you also have to have a constitution, democratic norms that are defended, right? And that if you have, for instance, a legislative body that refuses to defend those norms, that's how you walk your way toward autocracy. When you look at the series of headlines that we've seen this week from the Washington Post, from the Guardian, Think Progress, we put a bunch of them up there, about Donald Trump talking about using a national emergency to force money for a border wall, do you start to see the seeds of our democracy dying?
I don't know about dying, but I think we have a lot of evidence that our democracy is pretty darn dysfunctional at this point. We wrote the book when, or began to write the book, when Donald Trump emerged on the scene and got elected. And because really for the first time, certainly in our lifetimes and in many, many decades, we in the United States had elected a president who was not fully committed to democratic rules of the game. That's pretty scary. That's not fatal for democracy because we've got pretty strong democratic institutions. But in researching the book, we realized that the informal norms, the norms of mutual toleration and what we call forbearance or restraint in using our institutional powers have been weakening over the last few decades. And so the combination of a pretty authoritarian president and eroding democratic norms is pretty frightening.
Well, Daniel, I guess my question then to you would be to somewhat push back on what Stephen said, is that our norms are weakening but haven't fallen. When you talk about forbearance, you mean that one party agrees that if they lose an election, they still agree that the other party's reign is legitimate, right? That their turn to be in charge is legitimate. Republicans have shown pretty fundamentally since Clinton that they don't necessarily think it's legitimate when a Democrat gets to have their turn to be president. They inherently believe them to be illegitimate. And then with this president, they refuse. Mitch McConnell won't even put a bill on the floor unless Donald Trump says he can. Do we even have a functioning legislature with this Republican Party? It seems to me we're pretty far down the road to like a Politburo that just lets Trump do whatever he wants.
Well, you know, we're in a long simmering democratic crisis now for the past 2 years. I think the first 2 years of the administration, while the Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, there was really a risk of single-party domination or single-party control, a kind of model like Hungary or Turkey where one party dominates the political system and Congress essentially abdicates its role to the president. We've entered a new phase now, though, with thankfully in the elections in November, where there's now checks and balances in place with Democratic victories in the House of Representatives. But this doesn't mean we're in the clear, because essentially we've entered a new phase with the same underlying ailments in which you kind of have institutional warfare taking place, where the different branches of government controlled by different parties are going to go to war with each other, not get anything done. And so I think we'll continue to see this kind of escalation between the branches of government, emergency decrees, government shutdowns, executive orders. This kind of escalating politics is the world that we're living in now, and this is the way that other democracies have in fact died. I mean, again, as Steve said, our institutions are much stronger, but nonetheless, we're in a really dark spot at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, Daniel mentioned Hungary and Turkey. Both Mr. Orban and Mr. Erdogan were elected. You can have an elected autocrat. Here are the signs of an authoritarian leader, according to your book. The leader shows only a weak commitment to democratic rules. He or she denies the legitimacy of opponents. He or she tolerates violence. He or she shows some willingness to curb civil liberties or to curb the media. Is Donald Trump an autocrat?
Yeah, for sure. Donald Trump passed our litmus test we present in our book in flying colors in the campaign, even before he took office. But we've got more recent evidence of his autocratic instincts, and that comes just in the weeks since the Democrats took control of the House. In a democracy, when a president, even for a cherished piece of legislation, doesn't have the votes in Congress, a president has to know how to either compromise or fundamentally to lose. When Bill Clinton, who spent 2 years on health care reform, lacked the votes in Congress, he knew how to lose. When George Bush, who claimed a mandate for Social Security privatization after getting reelected, realized he didn't have the votes, he gave up.
Yep.
Donald Trump is showing with the struggle over the wall, that he doesn't know how to lose.
Yep.
And is willing to violate not only democratic norms, but maybe democratic rules.
Absolutely. And to inflict
to get what
incredible
he wants.
pain on millions of people, in his own words, until he wins. Stephen Levitsky, Daniel Ziblatt. The book is How Democracies Die. Highly recommend everyone read it. Thank you very much.